Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 17th ever Highlight Haven interview. My name is Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by a very special guest. He is a college football writer for The Athletic and a co host on The Audible. Let me welcome Stewart Mandel to the show. It's great to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's get right into it. I just want to start by asking when you first decided that you wanted to work in the sports industry.
Gosh, probably when I was 8 or 9 years old. As soon as I became aware of what a newspaper sports section was, and just kind of was focused on that from there through high school and college, and fortunately had opportunities out of college to pursue this career.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you started working for Sports Illustrated in 1999 before eventually getting hired by Fox Sports in June of 2014. Then you began working for The Athletic in 2017, where obviously you still work today. Can you kind of just describe what that process has been like getting to the point where you are today?
I was very fortunate to get on at what was then the CNNSI, CNN Sports Illustrated Digital, when it was really in its kind of infant stages, and um, allowed me to cover college football nationally, probably younger than I was ready to do so, which eventually led to moving up to New York, working out of the main Sports Illustrated offices. And Sports Illustrated was still very much at the pinnacle. I mean, obviously, ESPN eventually, before I'd even gotten there, ESPN had become the dominant figure in sports, but Sports Illustrated was still very prestigious. And I really liked being on the digital side of it mostly. I did get to write for the magazine, but by then I really felt like I wanted to be primarily in the digital space because that's where people were mostly consuming sports by then. And I had no, I felt like I had my dream job and wasn't hardly ever looked to leave there, but things started to go south there. Their business was not doing very well, and you could kind of see the writing on the wall. So when the opportunity arose to go to Fox, Fox at that time had just started FS1, and they were investing in college football and TV. I can't say that I really was itching to do TV, but it was a fun thing to try out. And I was there for 3 years, and I had a lot of fun. And there too, like there's kind of reached natural end of the road, and things weren't going well in our profession at that point. A lot of layoffs, a lot of kind of dark headlines out there. But the Athletic at that time had just started up, and I thought that the founders, Alex and Adam, had a really great vision to give people what they want. Like people want really high quality sports journalism, and they weren't getting it for the most part. Uh, they invented a great product, and I was fortunate to be the first one in the door for college football and build up this culture we have now, where we believe there's no better college football coverage than you can get at the Athletic. And now I truly do have a dream. I'm very fortunate. Most people only have one dream job. I had a dream job at SI. Now I have a dream job now.
Yeah, and I mean, since you started working for the Athletic, obviously, it's worked out amazing for you. Now, in 2007, you published your first book, and I see it in the background there in
Yeah.
the setup. Bulls, Poles, and Tattered Souls: Tackling the Chaos and Controversy That Reign Over College Football. Can you just describe the process that you went through in order to get that book published?
I'd always wanted to write a book. Um, I wasn't sure what the book should be. Uh, at that time in college football history, we were knee deep in the bowl championship series, the BCS, which was just endlessly controversial and caused people to tear their hair out. And I had kind of started to, uh, that had kind of become my baby. Like that's what I liked writing about the most: the angst, the confusion, the controversy. And so the idea for that book was basically to, that was the main topic, but then also devote chapters to lots of other kind of evergreen topics in college football that were of interest to people, right? How the Heisman race works, how the top 25 polls work, realignment, which is a very quaint chapter to go back and read now compared to where realignment is now. It allowed me to um, kind of I don't know. The style of that book was basically half informational, half entertainment, to talk about some pretty dense topics in a hopefully amusing way, and people seem to like it. And it just kind of after that, it just kind of scratched the itch. Like people are always like, "What's your next book?" And I'm like, "I don't really feel I need to write another book. I got to do it. I had that experience, and I'm good."
Now, how long did the actual writing process take for that book?
Basically, the I kind of did the reporting in stops and starts, and then there was one summer of 2006, where I just took a leave from work and worked specifically on that for 2 months. And then that wasn't the end of it, but it was like that's where the meat and bones was written. Some people, many people in my profession, write a book on top of their normal job. I don't know how they do it. I'm not a good multitasker like that. I needed to shut off the SI.com brain and just focus on the book for a couple months.
Yeah, and then speaking of Sports Illustrated, you've mentioned that covering George Mason's run to the Final Four was one of your most enjoyable moments and experiences working for Sports Illustrated. Can you just explain what made that experience so special to you?
There's nothing, I mean, even though college football is my main job and my main, like, if you ask me what's your favorite sport, it's clearly college football. But I grew up just obsessed with March Madness, and it's never really stopped. Like, March Madness is my favorite event of the year. And I had the good fortune to cover it for many years for SI. And the thing with the NCAA tournament is, you know, they put out the bracket, and then at a place like SI, we're like, okay, Stewart, you're going to the DC site, and this other person's going to the Detroit site, or whatever it may be, and you have no idea which ones are going to end up being the newsworthy ones. And I got stuck at a lot of sites where nothing happened, but that year I happened to have the great fortune to be assigned to the site that ended up being one of the most memorable moments in the history of the tournament, because there have been other mid majors since then to make the Final Four, but they were really the first. And to this day, it's absolutely insane that team beat number one seed UConn, which I believe four of their starters played in the NBA, in the Elite Eight. And so it's like everything you could possibly want wrapped up in one sporting event in terms of drama, seeing history in the making. The kids on that team were really fun to cover. Um, and so, yeah, there's lots of things I could answer to, like, what was your favorite thing you've ever covered? I don't remember the thing you're reading from. I definitely remember saying it. I don't remember how long ago it was, but it's still the one.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the term Cinderella story is passed around quite a lot in college basketball. Underdog teams making a run. Would you consider that George Mason team to be the biggest Cinderella story in all of college basketball?
Until UMBC beat Virginia, because that was the unthinkable, right? I think George Mason was an 11 seed. 11 seeds, they happened to be a big underdog, but we reached a point. The tournament had been around for 30 something years, and no 16 seed had ever beaten a 1 seed, and there was no reason to think it ever would. And then not only did they do it, if you remember, they killed Virginia. It was so bizarre. And I remember being at a restaurant with my family, because I actually stopped covering it in 2015. No, 2017. That was my first tournament that I just got to watch purely for fun. And we're at a restaurant, and Virginia, I mean, UMBC is starting to build a lead, and like, oh, they're not going away. And eventually I was like, I've got to get home. I've got to see the end of this. And um, glad I did, because that was, to your point, like, that's the biggest Cinderella story.
Yeah, and then I mean, of course, they didn't make the farthest run into the tournament, but still, just the factor of them beating the one seed first time that it ever happened, as you mentioned, just made it that much of a better experience. Now, I mentioned during the intro that you are a co-host on the podcast The Audible with Stu and Bruce. Of course, that's with Bruce Feldman, who is another writer for The Athletic. How would you describe the relationship you two have built over the past few years?
It goes back 26 years. Bruce and I first met when I was the summer after I graduated from college. He was working at ESPN Magazine, which had just launched, and I got an internship there. and we've been friends ever since. And for most of that time, well, up until 2014, we were on the same sport. We would be at a lot of the same games. We never worked together. And in 2014, we both got hired to Fox within a few months of each other. And I've been working with him in one way or the other ever since. And, they didn't have a college football podcast yet. So we started that one and have been going ever since. I think the Audible, as he would say too, allows us to connect with the fans in a way that writing does not. It's much more like personal, and people are much more likely, if I see somebody at a game, to say, oh, I love the Audible, more so than, oh, I loved X story you wrote, because the Audible is more kind of part of their every day or every week experience, right? You can take it anywhere. um, and for us, I think it also really helps put into perspective, okay, like we have to wake up Sunday morning and decide, of all the things that happened in college football yesterday, what are like the 5 things we feel are most important to talk about on the show? And then from there, that might, other organic conversations might arise from that. So I've found that it really helps me, especially in season, uh, process in real time, like what readers and listeners are going to care about most. It's basically the stories that we end up talking about on the Audible, more often than not, are probably the most important stories in the sport that week.
What would you say has been your favorite part since starting that podcast?
Um, my favorite parts in starting that podcast is probably, we've had a lot of great guests, so I don't want to dismiss that, but it's like it just I don't know how to describe it. It's an opportunity to basically just have a conversation with your friend that you would be having anyway, and turn it into content. And it's much more informal than writing. It's much more conversational and natural. I guess that's the way I would put it. It's us. If somebody's listening to that show, they're hearing exactly how we talk about college football if we were at a restaurant the night before a game, versus a story, which tends to be more formal and also um, condensed. Like that's between, you're going to interview other people, you're going to get quotes for the story. It's less just my own voice. Yeah, I just feel like that it's almost like the outtakes. The podcast is the full version.
And then, obviously, when you write articles, that's for somewhere else. When you do this, you're the creator of this podcast. You can say what you really think, and I think that's a big part. Saying that a lot of times when you're writing for a publication, you have to be very professional, formal, just get the facts out instead of necessarily your opinion on the matter.
Yeah, and we do, it is part of the athletic. It's not like we are just doing it, for fun. So we do have to be professional. But I think what you're getting at, and is right, is, I more than Bruce, I write opinion columns. It's not like I never put my opinion in stories. Um, but this certainly allows you to give a lot more opinion. And I just think that that's the way people consume sports now. Like this isn't the old, like, traditional newspaper days of the beat writer gets the quotes and tells the story straight. And then there's like one or two columnists, and they're the only ones allowed to give their opinion. Pretty much every sports writer gives their opinion all the time, whether it's on Twitter or a podcast or a video or obviously even a written column.
Yeah, and then this will be the first year in college football where 12 teams are going to make the playoffs. Of course, this is a big jump from just 4 teams last season. Do you think this was a necessary change to expand the bracket? And if so, is 12 teams the right amount?
Yeah, it was a necessary change, but not necessarily like when we went from 2 to 4, it was because teams that could legitimately win the national championship were not getting that chance. Teams could go undefeated and not get a chance to play for the national championship. And that's not the reason for the 4 to the 12. It's because the postseason in college football had become so anticlimactic and stale, because the 4-team playoff, while it was an improvement over 2, came at the expense of all the other bowl games. And so we started to see the players opt out. The other bowl games just became like pure straight up exhibition games where you're not even necessarily seeing the best players. And the 14 playoff became stale because it was, how many times can you watch Georgia and Alabama and Ohio State and Michigan recently? So I felt like the playoff needed to get bigger in order to get new blood in there and in order to bring stakes back to the other bowls so that every year, Rose Bowl, Fiesta Bowl, Sugar Bowl, Cotton Bowl, etc., are playoff games. They're not exhibitions. Um, and, I think it hasn't even happened yet, but kind of looking at some of the, what we're seeing play out this season, it's going to accomplish exactly what I talked about in terms of widening the pool. I mean, you look at these playoff brackets, you'll see Iowa State, you'll see UNLV, Indiana, programs that never in a million years would have made the 14 playoff are going to get a chance to uh, be on the main stage. Now, are they going to win the national championship? Probably not. It's probably still going to be Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, it's Oregon, somebody like that. But that's okay. That's how it is in the NCAA tournament too. You get George Mason, you get Butler, who are all the, but and then Duke ends up winning the national title, and that's fine. I just think this will give more people across the country, more fan bases, a chance to experience the big stage. And like I said, these games are going to start in the middle of December. It used to be we get through conference championship weekend, everybody's all excited, and then we just go into hibernation for a month and we come back out on New Year's. Like this is going to be a reason to stay engaged in the postseason throughout December and January.
Yeah, absolutely. And then this past Saturday, Alabama took a 24-17 loss against Tennessee. Of course, that's Alabama's second loss in their past 3 games, and it's safe to say that their schedule doesn't get too much easier with their next 2 games being played against 21st ranked Missouri and 8th ranked LSU. Would you start to panic if you were Alabama right now?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Because first of all, you lost to Vanderbilt, and while Vanderbilt's not as bad, I don't. I mean, I think they're actually decent this year. If you can lose to Vanderbilt, you can probably lose almost any game on the schedule. And I just think making the playoff, okay, it's really could be disastrous for Kalen DeBoer because it was going to be really hard anyway to follow Nick Saban, and making the playoff in his first year was the bare minimum. It was just kind of like, okay, he might not win the national title, he might not play for the national title, but at the very least, he's going to make the playoff because he has a really good team. And if they go 9-3 and miss the playoff, that's just about as bad an outcome as you could have predicted for him in the first year.
Yeah, and then of course, we've seen a major increase in players using the transfer portal. It obviously has tons of positives as well as some negatives. What is your stance when it comes to the transfer portal as a whole?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's not all bad. It's not all good, even though some people try to make it seem that way. But for the most part, I think the positives outweighed the negatives. Starting with just the basic that it was never fair that the athletes were trapped, and that if they wanted to change schools like any other college student can do, they were penalized for that, for sitting out a year. Now you could say it's too far in the other direction now. That's because the courts intervened. That's not like the NCAA's choice. And then I think what you're seeing, and I mentioned some of the teams earlier, is it's helping with parity. It's allowing a school like Indiana. Indiana was terrible last year. New coach comes in, brings in a bunch of new players. They're good now. Vanderbilt brought in the quarterback from New Mexico State and some other guys, and they were terrible. And now they're able to beat Alabama. So it's not all just. Ohio State would be an example of high end. They were already very good, and then they went out and got an All-American safety from Alabama and a starting quarterback from Kansas State. Like that's definitely rich getting richer. But first of all, that's not a guarantee of success. Look at Florida State. Like they got all the NIL money and they got all the transfers, and they're terrible. And yeah, I just love that it's leveling the playing field a little bit. It's giving programs a chance to rebuild quicker and play at a high level, play at a much higher level than some of those schools have done recently.
Yeah, and then currently, when you look at the Heisman odds, Boise State running back Ashton Jeanty is in first place. Through 6 games, he's amassed a total of 1,248 rushing yards, 17 touchdowns, and an average of 9.9 yards per attempt. He's followed by Miami's Cameron Ward at number two and Oregon's Dylan Gabriel at number three. Do you agree with JT being the favorite as of right now?
I do, although I would have Travis Hunter up there as well. I know he hasn't played as much the last couple weeks, but I just think we've just never seen anybody like him that plays at such a high level on both sides of the ball. But what Genty's doing is historic. And, when he first started to pop up on these lists, people are like, there's no way a running back from Boise State is going to win the Heisman, right? That's impossible. But I don't think we realized yet or grasped yet. He's running for over 200 yards a game. Like I've always said that this has become such a quarterback award that for anybody at any other position to win, you have to do something stats wise that is just like we've never heard of this before. We've almost never heard of this before. That's how Devontae Smith won at Alabama as a receiver. His numbers were just so much higher than any receiver anytime recently. And that's the case for Genty. Now he's going to have to do it. He's just going to have to keep doing it. I mean, he's got a huge game this week at UNLV, who has a really good defense. If he has a bad night and runs for 47 yards, he will no longer be at the top of that list next week. And that's unfair. But I think when you're not a quarterback, you're expected to be perfect every week. But he's got an excellent shot. And again, that's another unintended but positive effect of the 12-team playoff. The reason he's so well known and people are watching Boise State is because they have a chance to make the playoff. If this were a normal year in the past where like even the best case scenario for Boise State would have been to play in a New Year's Six Bowl that people don't care as much about, you probably wouldn't see him getting as much attention as he is.
Yeah, now, you know, as you mentioned earlier, you used the word parity when describing college football. Of course, you have teams such as Texas, Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State, Georgia, and so many more all being considered legitimate contenders this year. If you had to make a prediction right now, who do you think is going to win it all?
Uh, Putting me on the spot there. I picked Georgia before the season. I'll stick with them because what I saw them do against Texas was, and also in the Clemson game, was the juggernaut that we thought we were going to see from them. They've just been inconsistent, and they might still be inconsistent. They might turn around and lose to Ole Miss or somebody, but they're going to make the playoff because they have such a good resume. And so then once you get into the playoff, and we'll see, we haven't experienced one of these yet, but I do think that a team like that is built for a playoff where you have to win 3, if not 4 games in a row against top competition. There's only going to be so many teams. Like there's to the point about the leveling the playing field. Like yes, Vanderbilt can go out in a given week and beat Alabama, but if Vanderbilt had to turn around and play Georgia the next week and Texas the week after that, they were not going to win all those games. Georgia is one of the few programs with the talent to do that.
Yeah, now we are going to wrap things up soon, but I do have one final question to ask. If there was one piece of advice that you could give to an aspiring sports broadcaster and journalist like me, what would it be?
You got to go out and create your own opportunities. People aren't going to just hand them to you. Whether that means taking an internship or a freelance assignment that doesn't pay well or isn't in a place you necessarily want it to be. Anything to get your foot in the door, to get reps, to get experience. This is not a profession that is learned in the classroom. It's learned out in the field. And then once you do get those opportunities, and I'll give you a real life example for me, if I had just kind of sat back and let them tell me what to do at that internship at ESPN Magazine, all they were going to have me do is fact check articles the whole summer. Not that there's anything wrong with fact checking, but obviously that's not what I wanted to do in my life. I wanted to be a writer. But I raised my hand and I said, they were putting out the college football preview issue. Hey, 25 teams previews have to be written. Can I help? Can I do a couple for you? And they let me do it. And I did it, and they were impressed with that. So they gave me more writing assignments, and kind of off we went. So it's A, getting your foot in the door, and then B, once you're there, any way I can help, any stories I can pitch. And they may say no, but it's worth trying because, like I said at the beginning, only you create your own opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. With that being said, I can't thank you enough for coming on. I really do appreciate it. Is there anything else you want to say to the people watching before we wrap things up?
No, I think you hit it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, big thanks to Stewart Mandel for being the 17th ever Highlight Haven interview guest. And as always, we'll see you next time.